Hello, hi. This is Greg Muna, aka Master Moo, with episode 20 of our weekly or bi-weekly occasional podcast. Welcome to Art is the Church of God the Creator. And today is Sunday, June 8th, but I'm going to begin with an update from yesterday, from Saturday, June 7th, 2025, because we are reading Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, and we are reading it with commentary live. We're live blogging from Octavia E. Butler's universe, which takes place now in the year 2025. It started in 2024, and it's in the form of journal entries, dated journal entries, for the protagonist of the novel, Lauren Olamina, and we've just caught up to her most recent one, which is dated Saturday, June 7th, 2025. So, for those of you not familiar or who haven't seen previous episodes, we've been reading The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, which was written in 1993, dystopian speculative fiction written in the early 90s, but taking place now in our current timeline in the 2020s, and it's a realistic look at what Octavia Butler imagined. The author Butler died about 20 years ago. She died in the early aughts, but in the 90s, in her final work, she very presciently saw the directions that we were heading socially, and used that for her. She was primarily a science fiction writer. This only has a very slight flavor of science fiction. It's mostly a dystopian social novel and a young adult fiction, taking from the perspective of a young visionary who is trying to start a better life in a negative environment. And the protagonist, Lauren, is actually a future prophetess. She's the future founder of a religion. So it's a Bildungsroman depicting the youth of a visionary youth who grows up to become a great religious figure, like a Confucius or a Buddha or, a prophet, but being presented from the earlier stage of just being a teenager with normal teenage insecurities and just beginning to see her voice. So I'm not going to recap the first whole part of the novel, but the protagonist is raised in a dystopian present-day Southern California, which has eerie similarities to our actual present-day world, but she's in a relatively privileged position. She's in a gated community, and she has a loving father who has a very good relationship with. Her father is the clergyman, is a reverend in a local Baptist church, and she's sort of inherits a religious outlook from him, but she develops her own theological viewpoint. So the novel psychologically is about sort of her conflict between her, you can say, her love for her father. So in Jungian terms, her Electra complex, although it's not eroticized, it's not pathological, it's completely normal, and her own individuation as the way she steps out of that shadow and becomes her own person and develops her own theological religious sensibility. So I think I have to turn down the microphone feedback. I was getting a little loud feedback in the ear. Thank you. Okay. So this is the protagonist, Lauren's journal entry dated Saturday, June 7th, 2025. That is to say, yesterday. Okay. And I had technical difficulties yesterday, but in general, I will be reading, live blogging the entries in real time and giving commentary as we progress. Our next entry will be Monday, June 16th, 2025. It's just a couple of pages, so let's get into it. Saturday, Parable of the Sower, Octavia E. Butler. In our text is page 80, and we're in chapter 7. Entry for Saturday, June 7th, 2025. I've finally assembled a small survival pack for myself, a grab-and-run pack. I've had to dig some things I need out of the garage and the attic so that no one complains about my taking things they need. I've collected a hatchet, for instance, and 2 small, light, all-metal pots. There's plenty of stuff like that around because no one throws anything away that has any possibility of someday being useful or saleable. I packed my few $100s in savings, almost $1,000. It might feed me for 2 weeks if I'm allowed to keep it, and if I'm very careful what I buy and where I buy it. I've kept up with prices, questioning Dad when he and the other neighborhood men do the essential shopping. Food prices are insane, always going up, never down. Everyone complains about them. I found an old canteen and a plastic bottle, both for water, and I resolved to keep them clean and full. I packed matches, a full change of clothing, including shoes in case I have to get up at night and run, comb, soap, toothbrush and toothpaste, tampons, toilet paper, bandages, pins, needles and thread, alcohol, aspirin, a couple of spoons and forks, a can opener, my pocket knife, packets of acorn flour, dried fruit, roasted nuts and edible seeds, dried milk, a little sugar and salt, my survival notes, several plastic storage bags, large and small, a lot of plantable raw seed, my journal, my Earthseed notebook, and lengths of clothesline. I stowed all this in a pair of old pillowcases, one inside the other for strength. I rolled the pillowcases into a blanket pack and tied it with some of the clothesline so that I could grab it and run without losing things. But I made it easy to open at the top so that I could get my journal in and out, change the water to keep it fresh, and less often, change the food and check on the seed. The last thing I wanted to find out was that instead of carrying plantable seed or edible food, I had a load of bugs and worms. I wish I could take a gun. I don't own one, and Dad won't let me keep one of his in my room. I mean to grab one if trouble comes, but I may not be able to. It would be crazy to wind up outside with nothing but a knife and a scared look, but it could happen. Dad and Wyatt Talcott took us out for target practice today, and afterward I tried to talk Dad into letting me keep one of the guns in my room. "No," he said, sitting down, tired and dusty, behind his desk in his cluttered office. "You don't have to keep it safe. You don't have anywhere to keep it safe during the day, and the boys are always in and out of your room." I hesitated, then told him about the emergency pack that I had put together. He nodded. "I thought it was a good idea back when you first suggested it," he said. "But think, Lauren, it would be like a gift to a burglar. Money, food, water, a gun. Most burglars don't find what they want all bundled up and waiting for them. I think we'd better make it a little harder for any burglar who comes here to get hold of a gun. It will be just a rolled-up blanket mixed in with some other rolled or folded bedclothes in my closet. No one will even notice it." "No." He shook his head. "No. The guns stay where they are. And that's that. I think he's more worried about the boys snooping around than about burglars. My brothers have been taught how to behave around guns all their lives, but Greg is only 8, and Ben is 9. Dad just isn't ready to put temptation in their paths yet. Marcus, at 11, is more trustworthy than a lot of adults, but Keith, at 13, is a question mark. He wouldn't steal from Dad, he wouldn't dare, but he has stolen from me. Only little things so far. He wants a gun, though, the way thirsty people want water. He wants to be all grown up yesterday. So maybe Dad's right. I hate his decision, but maybe he's right. Where would you go, I asked him, changing the subject, if we were forced out of here? Where would you take us? He blew out a breath, puffing up his cheeks for a second. To the neighbors or to the college, he said. The college has temporary emergency accommodations for employees who are burned out or driven out of their homes. And then, rebuilding, fortifying, doing whatever we can to live and be safe. Would you ever think about leaving here, heading north to where water isn't such a problem and food is cheaper? No, he stared into space. My job down here is as secure as a job can be. There are no jobs up there. Newcomers work for food if they work at all. Experience doesn't matter. Education doesn't matter. There are just too many desperate people. They work their lives away for a sack of beans, and they live on the streets. I heard it was easier up there, I said. Oregon, Washington, Canada? Closed, he said. You've got to sneak into Oregon if you get in at all. Even harder to sneak into Washington. People get shot every day trying to sneak into Canada. Nobody wants California trash. But people do leave. People are always moving north. They try. They're desperate and they have nothing to lose. But I do. This is my home. Beyond taxes, I don't owe a penny on it. You and your brothers have never known a hungry day here, and God willing, you never will. In my Earthseed notebook, I've written, a tree cannot grow in its parents' shadows. Is it necessary to write things like that? Everyone knows them. What do they mean now, anyway? What does this one mean if you live in a cul-de-sac with a wall around it? What does it mean if you're damned lucky to live in a cul-de-sac with a wall around it? Okay, that's the end of her journal entry that was dated yesterday, Saturday, June 7th, 2025. And obviously we can discuss the obvious metaphors, seed and tree. She talked about packing seed in her Go Pack, seeds, and she wants to make sure that they said, the last thing I wanted to find out, she says, was that instead of carrying plantable seed or edible food, I was carrying a load of bugs and worms, right? So she wanted to make sure that the seeds would be usable. And then in her journal, she uses that metaphor of a tree. A tree cannot grow in its parents' shadows, which reflects so these two phrases reflect sort of the central thesis of the novel, right, which is the characters, the individuation, her coming to selfhood and adulthood out of the shadows of her, the love of her family and her father, which, again, is a kind of a sublimated Electra complex without the, without the sexual component, but, emotional dependence. And the biblical subtext, the parable of the sower, of the idea of scattering seeds and seeds that are properly planted versus improperly, finding the correct soil, and that as a metaphor for growing into adulthood and the developing of the mission of her adulthood, which is her religious prophetic vocation. So that again connects back to the parable in the Bible because it's spoken by Jesus, so it's meant to be prophetic in that sense. And we talked earlier about the unique signification of the parable of the sower in the Bible, because that's the only parable where Jesus then talks about the puts a meta frame around it and talks about the importance of using literary devices as parables and the importance of literary interpretation, why it's necessary to interpret parables, why it's necessary to come to individual metaphorical interpretation of the parable allegory, as opposed to simply giving a command, moralistic command of behavior, do this or do that, which also is in scripture and in prophetic literature, in wisdom literature. So we're connecting our reading of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower both to the internal dynamics of her narrative and then also in terms of the biblical subtext that it's obviously intertext that it's related to, both subtext and intertext. And we'll come back to that. Now, again, I'm reading Parable of the Sower because it's a great work, and I have respect for Octavia Butler, but I don't sign on to all of the minor parts of her agenda. I'm certainly not interested in any defense of survivalism and sort of like the excuse for gun culture that goes along with that. I'm certainly do not share the author's interest in extraplanetary colonization. I personally think that is an example of bad faith. The reason why I think it's bad faith is that I think the scientific obstacles between here and, say, colonization of even our most nearby planets, Mars or the Moon, I just think the technical obstacles are too vast for it to ever be practical in a way which could save humanity. I am firmly convinced that we must resolve our problems here on Earth, and we must clean our environment and restore sustainability, or else we are doomed to extinction, and the miracle of our unique consciousness as human beings will disappear into nothingness, and that would be a crime against creation. In theological terms, that would be a crime against God, the Creator. And as I must remind you, art is the church of God, the Creator, so we are very concerned with that. And the mission of art is to hold a mirror up to the perfection of creation, the perfection which is inherent but latent in creation. And the artist is the person who has the skills and the gifts and the discipline to make that latent, inherent perfection perceivable through the senses, through sound art, through music, through visual art, through gustatory, olfactory, or tactile art. And I'm in addition to that, it's also through symbolic systems, writing and mathematics and reasoning, literature, and any notated art that uses symbolic systems occupies both a sensory dimension, of, for example, sound, we hear it, right? But if there is a notation, such as sound notation, then it also exists symbolically as a system which is decodable through logical reason, which is not perception but reasoning, different faculty. So the notated art, to use the theological metaphor, although for me it's not metaphor, it's quite a matter of what I profess or belief, you may say, is that symbolically notated art is operating through the faculty of reason, and the proper theological category related to reason would be God the Holy Spirit, or perhaps you might say, you might say God the daughter, Sophia, as opposed to God the Creator, or God the Son, or God the Mother, or anything like that. So we might say the Holy Spirit. But when we're talking about perception, perception directly relates to creation, because perception, that is to say, sight, sound, hearing, this is how we directly apprehend the physical universe around us. It's not mediated symbolically. We directly see, we directly hear. That's why perception is immediate and does not involve reasoning. Reasoning is at a different level of cogitation, right? And I do not consider the faculties as a hierarchy. I view them as all working together. Traditionally, philosophers like Aristotle, and Plato have always ranked reason, nous, as like the highest faculty. I think all of our faculties are equally essential and co-essential. I do not think that there's no such thing as, I'm an empiricist, so there's no such thing as reasoning independent of perception. All reasoning is ultimately based upon sense perceptions. If you had a brain in a vat that was somehow incapable of sense perceptions, it would never develop reason, But we're not brains in the vats. We are human beings. We have sense perceptions. We have reason. We have drives. We have emotions. We have autonomic functions such as breathing, metabolism. We have all of that happening simultaneously, and all of those 5 categories are essential to our beingness, our existence as human beings. So, the notated music has 2 aspects. Has both the sonic aspect, which everyone has, and the notated aspect, which generally only trained musicians interact with. And that's why trained musicians who can read music and who work with notated music have a more rational relationship to music. And I was talking about that last time. So the way a trained musician listens to and analyzes music is it is emotional, it is physical, it is all the same things that we have, but in addition to that, it's also analytical. And the same thing is true of literature. I'll come back to the music in just a second, but reading Octavia Butler, reading literature, it exists both as a verbal document and as a written document. So when I read it out loud, as I just did now, we're experiencing it as sound. We're experiencing the sound patterns. We're experiencing the poetic, the use of alliteration and assonance and rhythm and all of those sort of things which create like metrical versification, all those poetic aspects which make it interesting as a sound. But then when we read it on the page and we analyze it on the page, then that opens up questions of intertext, subtext, referentiality, and and so on, and that all makes it deeper. And so even if we're reading a very simple text like Parable of the Sower of Octavia Butler, which is written as in a deliberately sort of simple young adult fiction style, but actually has like a much deeper sort of philosophical structure, because it was written, by late in life by an adult person who was creating a sort of a virtual avatar of her younger self, in this case as the founder of religion, which is very interesting. I mean, in that sense, it was doubly prophetic because in many aspects of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower accurately forecasts the world that we're in now in terms of environmental destruction and so on and so forth, and violence and, the depictions of sort of social decay, all of that which is depicted. So it was prophetic from the standpoint of the 90s and early 90s when she wrote it. And it's also prophetic in the sense that now, nearly 20 years after her death, Octavia Butler, the author herself, is becoming post-mortem a kind of Lauren Olamina, a kind of a prophetic figure, so that the religion, the fictional religion, Earthseed, created in the text, is actually coming into existence, as a result of this. Is really very extraordinary, And this is really, for writers, this is one of the greatest achievements. I mean, for any type of artist. I mean, we were talking about Wagner last time. Wagner created works of musical and theatrical art which became the center of a social vision. You know, which we talked about the Gesamtkunstwerk in our last episode, and I talked about last Sunday, that June 1st, I went to Philadelphia to hear an extraordinary performance of Tristan und Isolde, Wagner, and I was talking about how my listening to it, it was, of course, I listened to it the way anyone listens to music, as emotion, as emotional expression, as catharsis, you know, and so on, as a gripping narrative, but I was also listening to it analytically, you know, as someone who has studied the score and reads the notated. So I was experiencing it on the nexus of both of those, on both levels, which is really great. You know, that's why anything that you enjoy on the page, you should read aloud, whether it's a poem or a novel. And anything that you study in the score, you should also listen to the live performance. You know, it's good to study the score, especially like, you know, with YouTube, follow the score, listen to it, but then go to the live performance, be in it without the score, and allow those two experiences to synthesize within yourself. Have the experience of the scoreless live reading. If it's a masterpiece, you don't need the score in live performance. The artist, if they're good performers, they bring it to life. You don't need the score as a crutch, you know. If you're talking about a mediocre work, and I saw a mediocre work, unfortunately, this week in Carnegie Hall, and it needed the score. Luckily, we brought the score and we followed the score, but the music itself was simply not good enough to sustain attention without the score. For those of you who are wondering, it was the failed first opera of Richard Strauss, Guntram, and no reflection or negative comments on the performers itself. The work itself was just weak. The libretto was weak, and the musical realization of it was correspondingly weak. And the composer, who was a genius, great composer, Strauss, who I've praised previously in Salome and Electra, one of the greatest geniuses and visionaries of and underappreciated visionary, because his later work is more conservative. His earlier heroic modernist works are not properly appreciated in context, but they should be. But this early attempt was a clumsy pastiche of Wagner without Wagner's genius, without Wagner's all-encompassing vision. And what I said in our last podcast is that a great artistic vision reaches out. It does not restrict itself to purely to the concert hall experience or the art gallery experience, but it by necessity builds a social structure, a vision which encompasses everything, which encompasses politics and encompasses society, and it becomes, and this was Wagner's vision of the Gesamtkunstwerk, of the total artwork that he wanted. He started with a visionary new concept of music, and then it expanded beyond music to incorporate a visionary concept of theater, of stage design, and then to find the proper container for it, architecture, to create a theater, and then to contain the theater, a whole community of people around it, which created a whole community, which is the Bayreuth Festival in Bavaria. And then from there to it reaches out to the whole world. And people have, of course, focused on the negative repercussions of that, how that was co-opted in bad faith by extremism, fanaticism, and the forces of reaction in the 20th century. But that does not diminish the greatness and the achievement of the work itself, regardless of whatever flaws. And of course, we are human beings. We all have our personal flaws. And that's not to say that the creator of artwork is the same as a moral leader or a prophet, but that creator is still able to inspire greatness. I know nothing about Octavia Butler's personal life. I mean, she seems like she was a wonderful person, but I don't know. I mean, I'm sure she also had her issues or her demons that she fought against. And as I said, there are aspects of her work that I do not subscribe to. I find, I know she's speaking through the persona of an immature 15-year-old, but still there are aspects of the writing which I find which I'm unsympathetic to. I'll put it that way. Unsympathetic, extremely opposed to. Essentially there is, as I said, an implied pro-gun sort of Second Amendment survivalist attitude. It's not explicit, it's implicit, because the characters are in this desperate sort of Wild West, cowboy survival situation, right? Which, and then that's just inherent in the narrative setting. And, the protagonist has a utopian vision of extraplanetary colonization, and that is bad faith. There is simply no way for human beings to effectively colonize other planets. That's a dream. That is like yet another bad faith fantasy of immortality, that we're going to survive, that we're going to escape the problems on this planet by escaping into some sort of other realm. Never going to happen. It's not going to happen. I mean, Musk and all these people who are selling this, colonized Mars thing, they are selling an illusion. It is bad faith. But I'm keeping politics and pornography out of this podcast. So let's get back to our analysis of literature and connect it to a spiritual vision. I specifically in our last episode talked about how the revolutionary breakthrough of the harmony of Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, which in the live performance is just an overwhelming emotional journey, but from the nexus of not just performance but critical analysis of the notation, you are able to look at it and look at his harmonic procedure. And we talked about last time how he uses the 5/7, the dominant chord, which in traditional tonal common practice language is a chord of maximum dissonance requiring 2 degrees of resolution, the 7 to the 1 and the 4 to the 3, right? And of course the whole resolution from the 5 to the 1, but how this is the chord of consonance in Tristan, how there's a more dissonant chord, the so-called Tristan chord, the half diminished 7th, which resolves to the dominant 7th. So the dominant 7th becomes the consonant chord, the chord of rest, becomes a type of tonic. And what I was discussing in the last episode is that it can only be understood as an alternative. The dominant 7th can only be understood as an alternative tonic, not in a 5-limit aesthetic, not in the 5-limit aesthetic of traditional just intonation, but only in a 7-limit aesthetic of where we can hear the lowest chordal structure of over from a fundamental pitch. If we took the overtones 4, 5, 6, and 7 together as a unit, then we have the tonic consonant dominant 7th, or 5, 5, 7, but rooted on the 1, which is how it functions, essentially as an alternative tonic, which is floating and constantly moving. We think of it as like a constant movable do, like this is constantly going through transpositions and sequences and doesn't resolve. That we don't have the resolution finally from the Tristan chord, from the half diminished 7th to the fully diminished 7th to the tonic, not until the final B major chord in the final measures of the whole work. So this kind of free floating, movable 7th dominant tonic is a unique thing, and that is the analytical breakthrough, which comes from an analysis of the score itself, not so clearly on just the surface level of listening, but as I said, it's that nexus which makes it a deeper experience. And what I was discussing was how this coordinates, in my view, with Wagner's vision of music leading into synthesizing the arts, then the arts themselves synthesizing with social structures and political structures and transforming an entire society, was the same thing as the Shambhala vision of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. As far as I know, Trungpa never listened to Wagner. I think the only Western music he liked was Beethoven and Mozart. But I'm making that connection here, regardless of his personal musical taste. And that is perfectly justifiable. That is a good faith assertion on my part, because you don't have to share an artistic taste in order for there to be a commonality. I mean, for example, Wagner drew inspiration from Schopenhauer, from Schopenhauer's art, Schopenhauer's philosophy, but Schopenhauer was aware of Wagner and did not like Wagner. Schopenhauer liked Rossini, for example, whom Wagner had nothing but contempt for. So you don't have to share artistic taste in order to share a philosophical or aesthetic vision. And likewise, shared artistic taste can be the basis of a completely antagonistic philosophical vision. For example, Nietzsche, who was a disciple of Wagner's and who loved certain music of Wagner to the end of his life, completely broke against Wagner philosophically and denounced him as a complete charlatan, right? So both are possible. Okay. Chacun a son goût in that sense. I'm simply reporting from what I find meaningful and truthful and beautiful to me. And I hope it is also truthful and meaningful and beautiful to you. And I hope I can inspire you to find things which are truthful and meaningful and beautiful for you. Because whatever is truthful and meaningful and beautiful is a reflection of the inherent perfection of creation itself. And that is the mission of art, to reveal, to make clear to the senses, to reveal through the senses, the inherent and latent perfection of creation itself, which is revealed symbolically through math and through the sciences, but directly through perception, without going through any symbolic mediation of a reasoning process. Yes. Okay. So, in order to make that connection a little bit further with the idea of literature, I wanted to read a short passage from the previous literature that we read, the core text of Shambhala, which was the sadhana of Mahamudra, and by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, as a kind of an appendix to that. Trungpa Rinpoche gave a little discussion of the idea of mantra, of seed syllable. So in literature, using sound, sort of sound art to generate words, which then become the basis of oral and written literature. And if you remember from our previous episode, which find it in the links here, of the sadhana of Mahamudra, which I read on April 5th, on the anniversary of the deaths of Trungpa and Allen Ginsberg. This is written by Chogyam Trungpa, and also very deeply influential on my other teacher, Allen Ginsberg. This was also generatively important to Ginsberg's later poetic practice, starting with the inherent quality of sound, of the spoken sound, of the performed sound, of the embodied sound, and embodied poetics as opposed to disembodied poetics, certainly. Poetics for us, for we the living. Okay, so this is a short text, and I want us to relate this a little bit to what we just read and analyzed in Octavia Butler, A Parable of the Sower, in terms of her scriptural subjects. For Butler, it's an evolving from a Christian intertext into a sort of a post-Christian theology. This is starting with a Buddhist and a Hindu intertext, but then expanding beyond that into a Shambhala vision. So I think we can say there's a similar process coming from different wisdom traditions here. Okay, so Trungpa Rinpoche, an approach to mantra. Homage to the Guru, Yidams, and Dakinis. When I hear the profound music of Hum, it inspires the dance of direct vision of insight. At the same time, my Guru presents the weapon which cuts the life of ego. Just like the performance of a miracle, I pay homage to the incomparable one. Okay, so let's just understand what that little invocation was. He says, homage to the gurus, the yidams, and the dakini, the teacher, to the representations of the deities and the associated, the dakinis, sort of the retinue and the everything around these visions of embodied sacredness, right? And understood as one thing, seeing the divine within the human teacher and seeing the human within the divine manifestation, seeing this interpenetration of finite and infinite, divinity and mundanity, right? And he describes this as the profound music of Hum, just the sound, Hum, right? Which we read in the Sadhana Mahamudra was the seal, Hum, 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 right? It inspires the dance of direct vision of insight. So from the sound, Hum, which is profound music, it branches out from that into movement, the dance. It inspires the dance of direct vision of insight. Vision, both visual and also in terms of analytical, enlightened intellect, right? Insight and direct perception. All right. At the same time, my Guru presents the weapon which cuts the life of ego, just like the performance of a miracle. So this vision of art is without ego. It cuts the life of ego. Well, what does that mean? We traditionally think of art as self-expression, as an expression of the ego, but no. Art holds up a mirror, an egoless mirror, to the pre-existent perfection which is already there, to the divine, to the, it says here, the performance of a miracle, which is the miracle of creation. I pay homage to the incomparable one. And you can interpret that in whatever sense is genial for you, the incomparable one. But I think we should say that is that interpenetration to the Guru, Yidams, and Dakinis of the human and the divine, the finite and the infinite, using the language of Buddhism. Okay? But also coming from its earlier tradition in Hinduism, just as the language and the parables of Jesus' teaching, such as the parable of the sower, the teachings of Christianity are based upon the earlier teachings of the allegorical parables of the Hebrew tradition, of the Jewish tradition, just as Judaism gave rise to Christianity. Hinduism is the parent tradition of Buddhism. They're distinct in terms of orientation and structure. Okay, so that was the introduction. All right, and to which Trungpa Rinpoche adds, one must understand the basic usage of mantra in the teachings of Buddha. Whether it is in the form of mantra, dharani, or a single syllable, it is not at all a magical spell used in order to gain psychic powers for selfish purposes, such as the accumulation of wealth, power over others, and destruction of enemies. So it's not dual. It's not based upon, you and me, self and other, me top, you bottom, and so on, right? Such as accumulation of wealth, power over others, and destruction of enemies. That was my sidebar. According to the Buddhist Tantra, all mantras and other practices, such as visualizations, hatha yoga, or any other yogic practices, must be based on the fundamental teaching of Buddha, which is the understanding of the four marks of existence: impermanence, anitya, suffering, dukkha, void, shunyata, and egolessness, anatman. In this connect, now let's repeat that again. The four marks of existence are impermanence, suffering, void, and egolessness. Impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, void, shunyata, and egolessness, anatma. Yes, four basic realities. We'll always be coming back to that. And that is good faith, understanding of existence. Anything that denies that is bad faith. Yeah. Any attempt to say that there is a permanent existence or a non-suffering existence or an actual solid existence or an actually structured ego, those are all bad faith. Anyone who argues in favor of any of those is arguing in bad faith, and they are doing so to further their own agenda, not presenting a lie as truth. Yeah, it's not a matter of opinion. It's a basic matter of good faith, truthfulness versus bad faith, deceitfulness. Okay. In this, that was again my sidebar. It's coming back to Chogyam Trungpa's commentary on mantra. In this connection, it should be pointed out that in contrast to Hindu Tantra, Buddhist Tantra is based on shunyata and anatta, void and egolessness. The concept of shunyata is quite easy to relate to the whole content of Tantra, as in Mahamudra experience, and that of anatta is most essential. Some Western scholars mistakenly identify the preparation of mandalas and the countless divinities with the Hindu tradition as if it were an umbrella under which all other Indian religions might be found. Although some Vedantic mystics might claim their experience to be the same as Mahamudra, there is an essential difference. For the Herukas and all the other divinities in Buddhism are not external. In other words, they are aspects of the awakened state of mind, such as Avalokiteshvara representing the compassionate aspect of Buddha nature. There are various mantras connected with these bodhisattvas and Herukas which help to achieve. Now, again, my commentary, the realization that everything is in your mind doesn't mean that it's an illusion. So the realization that you're experiencing everything in your mind, you're experiencing divinity, you're experiencing deity, you're having an experience and it's a representation of a state of mind. That state of mind is reality. That is real. It's not just, wow, tripping, or a drug or something like that. This is what we can't wrap our heads around, maybe because of drug use. I don't know. I just wanted to push back against bad faith kind of trivializations of these states of mind, which perhaps even go back to otherwise great Sigmund Freud and his dismissal of religious experience as the sort of oceanic megalomania, sort of God complex and the oceanic experience, we don't need to take a dismissive tone. All right. Because we're grown-ups. Yes. All right. Getting back to the text, the commentary here on mantra, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche says, there are various mantras connected with these bodhisattvas and Herukas, embodiments of compassion and compassionate and wrathful energy, bodhisattvas and Herukas. Bodhisattvas, enlightened beings, future Buddhas, Herukas, deities, right? Which help to achieve, for example, the essence of compassion, wisdom, or energy. In this essay, we are discussing the single syllable hum. Hum is the sound connected with energy, and it is most profound and penetrating. This mantra was used by Guru Padmasambhava in his wrathful aspect in order to subdue the force of the negative environment created by minds poisoned with passion, aggression, and ignorance. Hum is often the ending of certain mantras used to arouse the life energy. Before chanting the sacred music of hum, I repeat that, the sacred music of hum, it is necessary to consider the relationship of teacher and pupil. There must be oral transmission. The pupil should not choose a teacher at random, for unless the teacher belongs to a spiritual lineage, he may be able to give a mantra but will not be able to transmit its power. Now, I'm speaking right now online. Some of you are listening live, some of you are watching on replay, and this is not a person-to-person where we're not in the same room, but I am putting my voice out there because the sound of the voice is an essential component. And I'm showing my face, and I'm being as present as I can in this sort of digital interface here, which is not the same as simply putting the words on paper. Yeah. So I'm reading my teacher's words on paper, but I'm trying to embody them through my voice and through my physical body, and I'm trying to communicate part of that to you right now through the medium of the podcast. And I hope that we will meet person to person and face to face in a musical performance sometime soon. I hope that I will soon meet you in a room with live musicians, and that we will actually have a person to person communication, and that I will learn from you and you will learn from me and we will learn from each other. But right now we're using this video podcast on on YouTube or we're out of the platform as a kind of an intermediary and a kind of a synecdoche for that. Okay. It is necessary to consider the relationship of teacher and pupil. There must be oral transmission. The pupil should not choose a teacher at random, for unless the pupil should not choose a teacher at random, for unless the teacher belongs to a spiritual lineage, he may be able to give a mantra, but he will not be able to transmit its power. Okay, so unless the teacher belongs to a spiritual lineage, he may be able to give a mantra, but he will not be able to transmit its power. So having gone through the sort of training of a lineage and sort of given up like your personal thing and and sort of surrendering to a tradition and the discipline that goes along with it is what enables you, the teacher or the artist, to transmit the power of an utterance, of a sound, which, in the words of Chicken Trungpa, is sacred music. Yes, the power. With a strong karmic bond between teacher and pupil, or artistically between artist and receiver, artist and audience, the pupil should be inspired with an unwavering conviction of trust in the teacher's spiritual quality. Whatever difficulties the pupil might continually have to undergo and whatever sacrifices he might have to make, his devotion must remain constant until he is able to surrender his ego. If he fails to do this, he will not be able to experience the sacred music of Hum. The sacred music of Hum. He will not be able to develop understanding of its profound meaning, and he will not be able to develop the transcendental siddhi, which is power. When a beginner chants the sacred music of Hum, he might find some temporary benefits. For example, his mind might become quiet and irritating thoughts might be eased. This is because Hum is composed of Ha, and here there's you can see the Tibetan script for Ha, there's the and So the sounds, the H sound, the U, the initial consonant, the vowel, and the concluding consonant. Ha, U, Ha expels the pure air from the lungs. So try that. Let's everyone just go Ha. Ha expels the pure air from the lungs. U releases the most irritating thoughts through the mouth. U. And clears the remaining thoughts through the nose. It goes because M is a nasal sound. The air comes out through the nose. Expel, diaphragmatic Ha. Ooh. That's right. The relax and through the nose. As mentioned in yogic texts, prana, breath, is like a horse, and the nadis, channels, are like roads, and the mind is the rider. In this way, using prana, using breath, tension is released, and any psychological disturbance may be relieved, but only as a temporary measure. For advanced meditators, the syllable Hum is a means of developing the 5 wisdoms. The Ha is the mirror-like wisdom, clear and continuous. Ah is the wisdom of equanimity, panoramic awareness. U is the wisdom of discriminating awareness, awareness of details. Is all-accomplishing wisdom, effortless accomplishment of all actions. Ah is the wisdom of all-encompassing space, Dharma Dhatu, the ground from which all things originate and to which they return. The meditator will not find these wisdoms in an external source, but rather, like the spark which bursts into flame when fanned by the wind, he discovers them within himself or herself. Hum is the seed syllable of all Harukas in the four orders of Tantra, Kriya, Upa, Yoga, and Uttara, which includes Ati. The Harukas originated with the subjugation and transformation of the Rudra of ego. The absence of ego is Shunyata. Rudra is the false deification of ego. Rudra is the acid trip where you think you're God when you're just completely messed up, right? The absence of ego is Shunyata. In the Vajrayana, Shunyata or void... No, sorry, that was my comment, getting back to the text. The absence of ego is Shunyata. In the Vajrayana, Shunyata or voidness is expressed in terms of fullness, as in the line of the Heart Sutra, which says, form is emptiness, and the very emptiness is form. Therefore, this form has tremendous energy, which is simply what the five wisdoms are. Hum is referred to in many texts as the sonorous sound of silence. Hum represents the state of meditation when awareness breaks out of the limits of ego. It was by that force of hum that the fortress of Rudra was reduced to dust. Hum may be regarded as the fearless utterance of a warrior shooting his arrow into the battlefield. Hum is sometimes referred to as the mantra of the Vajrakalaya Mandala of the High Tantra school. First, it is the dagger of beyond thought, which stabs with deadly accuracy into the heart of dualistic thoughts. Second, it is the dagger of luminous transcendental insight, which pierces the heart of confused darkness. Third, it is the dagger of the state of non-meditation, which pierces the heart of thought-formed meditation, so that the meditator is delivered from subject matter. Fourth, it is the dagger of complete devotion to the all-pervading guru, which stabs to the heart of hopes and fears, so that the teacher and pupil become inseparable. These four penetrations of hum are described in the text of the Anu Yoga Tantra. Guru Padmasambhava said that when you sing the crescendo music of hum and let go of all thoughts, the ultimate meditation experience are the echo of this music. Also, hum is referred to as the concentration of all blessings and energy. Etymologically speaking, the Sanskrit word hum means gathering together. Hum is not a magic spell to increase the power of ego, but it is concentrated power devoid of ego. Hum, combined with complete devotion, is like an arrow piercing the heart. It takes the form of the memory of the guru. Also, the abrupt experience of cutting through all thoughts is the action of hum. Therefore, hum is the energy of universal force, which transcends the limitations of ego, or rather pierces through the wall of ego. I hope that the people who practice the sadhana of the embodiment of all the siddhas, the sadhana of Mahamudra, will study this essay very closely. May we all unite in the crescendo of hum and liberate all sentient beings into the oneness of hum. Okay, so we'll come back to this over and over again. The sacred music of hum, the crescendo of hum, the music, the power of music, the power of sound to liberate us out of into egolessness, out of egoic, dualistic delusion, out of bad faith into good faith. All right, so until next time, this has been Art is the Church of God the Creator. Greg Muna, a.k.a. Master Moob, signing off until next time. Okay.